Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with SOCi, the 2020 Localized Marketing Benchmark Results Reveal. My name is Lizzie, and I am a Senior Account Manager for Localogy, and I will be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. The webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with a presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. Our speaker today is Monica Ho. As CMO, Monica is responsible for developing and leading SOCi's marketing and communications functions, as well as ensuring the company is uniquely positioned in the highly crowded social media and reputation management marketplace. Monica's tenure in the industry includes nearly 20 years of digital marketing, advertising, and research experience, including a solid foundation in sales, strategy, and data analytics. Prior to SOCi, she served as global CMO at Ground Truth, where she helped grow the business from an early-stage startup to an award-winning global brand. Well regarded in the space, Monica has received numerous accolades and awards, including being ranked one of the most powerful women in mobile advertising 3 years in a row by Business Insider and one of the 100 most influential North American B2B tech marketers by Hot Topics. In addition to her role at SOCi, Monica serves on the board of the Advanced Digital Marketing and Media Community of Austin, as well as serves on the advisory boards of several digital marketing and technology startups within New York, Texas, and California. We are also joined by one of our senior analysts with Localogy, Michael Bolin. I will go ahead and pass it over to Michael to kick things off.
Yes, hi everyone, and thanks, Lizzie. So before we get to Monica and the deep dive on the data, I'd like to give a few stage setting comments for the sake of context, particularly from the perspective of an independent industry analyst. And through that lens, I'm personally and selfishly very excited about this data set. So having seen it already, it's an absolute treasure trove of actionable findings and insights for localized brand marketing. And the best way to think about this is it sort of quantifies and puts a tangible scoring system on best practices. We often talk about and examine such best practices and success factors for multi-location brands and ranking factors and these sorts of things. But what this report does is it really provides a standard unit of measurement and therefore a tangible target of and like a set of best practices for brands or the agencies that represent them to really aim for. So what is it? So Monica will go over this in a bit in terms of detail, but at a high level, it's a collaborative research project from Localogy and SOCi, examining multi-location brand performance across the most influential channels for local buying decisions. So that's search and social media and ratings and reviews. And Monica will detail that in a bit in terms of the specific channels. But how? So how is that done? So starting with a very large data set from Places Scout, the LMBR team applied a scoring model that quantifies top attributes for brand local presence, care, and engagement. So that includes everything from where they're showing up in search results to how complete their listings and profiles are in places like GMB and Yelp, how responsive they are to reviews. And in total, there were about 25 criteria along these lines for each business. So that's tens of thousands of data points when you consider that the base data scrape happened on an individual location basis. So in other words, if a brand has 500 locations, that's how comprehensive the evaluation is. So the scoring model itself also importantly weighed these criteria based on the leading thinking about things like ranking factors. So the degree to which Google emphasizes and rewards different criteria like profile completeness and other things like this was very much reflected in the scoring model. So the why is this important? As I mentioned, this creates a sort of standard unit of measurement. So there's a tangible target to hit. And not just the raw scores that you're going to see throughout this presentation, but the report is prescriptive in that it uncovers the best practices that lead to those scores. And Monica will give a few examples of those that brands can really use to meet or exceed the benchmark and really refine their local marketing game. So the why now? That's an equally important question. So this project is in its second year and was really kicked off in this current wave before we had a global pandemic on our hands. And the goals of this report to, motivate brands to optimize their local marketing and everything I just mentioned is important in normal times. But now, clearly, the stakes are higher. And I think that means two things. One, local search activity and its importance are elevated. So people need to know when and how they can get their groceries or their medicine. And given that those variables are more dynamic than normal, so for example, hours of operation, that needs to be reflected in comprehensive and updated, listings on a per location basis. So in other words, the cost and the consequences of inaccurate data are greater today than they are normally. And then number two, this heightened importance on local listings accuracy, we believe will make brands stronger in the long run, and sort of instill best practices that could have a lasting effect beyond the current global crisis. And that general theme of like the silver lining of all of us kind of coming out of this stronger, I think is going to apply across the board to several aspects of our lives and work. But we believe localized digital marketing will be one of those things. So with that contextual backdrop, I'll turn it over to Monica for a deeper dive on the report itself and its importance and its drivers and its results. So Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining today. As Michael mentioned, we're really going to go through some of the details and findings behind the latest research, Localized Marketing Benchmark research that we did in partnership with Localogy. But like Michael, before we kind of get into those results, I did want to give a couple of slides to really talk about the so what, and Michael kind of laid that all out there about how important some of these areas are to businesses given the current crisis. But like Michael said, even prior to the pandemic that we're in, and through this research, what we found over the last 2 years is localization, or the localization of your digital marketing, is one of the largest untapped opportunities for multi-location marketers. And we've seen that not only in the first study that we conducted in 2019, but we see it again this year. We've definitely seen some improvements, which is great, but still a lot of areas of opportunity here for marketers to really modernize their marketing strategies and to be more relevant, authentic, and really timely in the current environment. So that's really some of the biggest finding out of this research, is that this is such an untapped opportunity for multi-location marketers. And to emphasize that, I know that most folks that are probably tuning in today probably know that search queries, the majority of them have local intent, but I don't know that a lot of marketers really understand that most brand engagements are local as well, especially when you talk about digital brand engagements. In fact, based on our research, nearly 3 out of 4 digital engagements with a brand are now happening on local pages like Google My Business, Facebook, and other platforms and sites like that. And we know that 80% of those consumers who are engaging at those local pages or those local platforms are influenced by the content that they're finding on those pages. So as this area of marketing, digital marketing, search becomes more intelligent and even more personalized, a comprehensive localized marketing strategy is really key to effectively leveraging each and every consumer interaction that you have as a brand while maximizing your full reach through each and every location that you have. So that's really the opportunity at hand and at stake here. Again, to back up some of that, I wanted to share with you a little bit of data and some trending. You can clearly see this localization trend through this chart to the left here. What this is actually showcasing is where search results are executing when a search has been conducted. And really what's interesting here is if you look at these dark gray bars, you're seeing that a lot of local search results used to execute on other organic results or website pages, right? When you look at 2013. But since that time, organic search results have been in a decline. And what's been on the rise are search results executing on local listings, or what is commonly now known as the 3-pack. And then you have localized AdWords, or AdWords coming in here and filling up the rest. But this trend is really important. It really kind of showcases this localization opportunity. And really what's happened over the past decade, especially on sites like Google My Business, is these platforms are actually turning from query engines to more of an answer engine. And why is that happening? Well, it's happening because what a lot of these platforms was realizing is that consumers would be looking for answers or looking for business information. And the pages and websites they were actually ending up on were either not mobile optimized or really weren't serving up the information that they needed at that point in time. So again, where platforms like Google, Facebook, and others have been really focusing their attention is building their own knowledge centers, their own knowledge graph. In the case of Google My Business, that's very much the case. Right? And you can see that clearly when you conduct any business search, and the result is what you see at the right here, especially on the phone. When you conduct a business search, what you're more likely than not seeing nowadays is local listings that come up on top of the search results. And as you can see here, it basically takes up the entire screen. And so that's why we're seeing this surge of listings kind of executing on this 3-pack, right? So this whole trend of where these search results are now executing really has made this 3-pack and these local listings the new battleground for localized marketing, and in an area that marketers and brands really need to be paying attention. Outside of the Google My Business page and these local pages, we're also finding that other content is actually affecting your presence on sites like Google My Business and other large platforms. And these other content areas are things like social chatter, social conversations, as well as what your consumers are even writing in local reviews. A lot of that information is actually going into these knowledge centers and building a lot of that content that gives platforms like Google or Facebook information on how they should rank these businesses in terms of their expertise, their authority, and their trustworthiness. So outside of just local search, multi-location brands need to really care about other areas like local social and that conversation that's happening, as well as any place that you might have those local ratings and reviews about your business. The chart that's showing here is just some data that I already referred to, which is 3 out of 4 brand engagements that we're seeing on whether that's a GMB page or Facebook are actually happening on the local page level versus the national page level. Again, just really emphasizing the importance of a localized digital marketing strategy. And we know that these areas that we just talked about really affect every part of your business, right? We know 97% of consumers now conduct an online search when in need of a business service, a business need or service. 78% of purchase decisions are now influenced by social content. 70% of your consumers are now turning to social and reviews for customer care issues. And 60% of those consumers will seek out an alternative if they see more than 3 negative reviews or that the average rating does not meet their expectation, right? So really, really important areas for a business to understand how important and influential these areas are to your business. And we know when localized marketing is done effectively, it can do several things for your brand. One, it can help propel your brand to the top of organic search results, as we mentioned before, by building expertise, that authority, and that trustworthiness. We also know that it could help build and maintain a highly engaged base of loyal customers, which is really important, again, in this day and age where consumers really trust each other over, brands. And then it can help drive increased traffic and sales to your local businesses. So breaking down what we see based on this research as the critical components of a localized marketing strategy, it comes down to this trifecta. We talked about Google My Business, a very, very important platform based on how many consumers are actually starting their search here and executing on these local pages. And it's important to understand that Google My Business also feeds into other highly used consumer apps like Waze and Google Search. Outside of Google My Business, another really important platform is Facebook. Why are we talking about these three separate platforms? And we'll get into Yelp in a second. It's because not only are they important because that's where consumer usage is, but it's also important because we need to understand that each one of these platforms has its own database of local information. So although they might share information and take information from other sites to kind of build their knowledge of a business, they maintain their own, name, address, telephone number, business information on each of your businesses. And to really impact that, you have to be optimizing your local businesses on each and every one of these platforms. And like I said with GMB, each of these platforms also feed other highly used consumer apps, which is really important. Again, Google My Business feeding, top map and navigation app Waze. You look at Foursquare and it's feeding, Foursquare. You look at Facebook and it's feeding Instagram and Messenger, and then Yelp. Although I know a lot of brands have a love-hate relationship with Yelp, Yelp is still very important based on all of these relationships that they have. Not only are they the primary source for a lot of the primary voice search apps from Siri to Siri and Alexa, but they're also feeding Apple navigation as well, which is really important to understand. Again, where all of this local information is coming from and where it's being used. When you bring these three important platforms together, it's important to understand that standalone, their impact is really important, as we mentioned, because a lot of consumers are engaging with these sites. A lot of traffic is going through these platforms. But really, you have to understand that the whole is actually greater than the sum of its parts. When you take all three of these into consideration, you're actually optimizing all three of these. And if you really think about these three major platforms, they really represent the three important areas of a really solid localized marketing strategy, which is local search, local social, and your ratings and reviews. All right, so with that in mind, again, as Michael mentioned, that importance, that need for marketers to be aware of these platforms and why they're so important to your business and how consumers are conducting their searches and making decisions is why we felt this type of research was so important. And so again, as Michael mentioned, starting in 2019, Localogy and SOCi partnered together to bring this research to the marketplace to really help multi-location brands understand how localized marketing was impacting their businesses, and really to help them see how these top digital channels could help impact their growth and future success. And again, in this study, we're going to be covering not only local search, but social and ratings and reviews. So getting into some of the details around the study itself, Michael talked a little bit about the scoring and the benchmark that was created. And this benchmark was created using the analysts at Localogy. It was based on 100 possible points, so a 100-point benchmark, or a 100-point score, which the benchmark came out of. And the scoring was divvied up into three areas. So out of the 100 points, presence actually was worth a little bit over 37 of those points, and really talked to if a brand had good presence when a localized search was being conducted, could they easily be found on these top platforms? For customer care, that made up 45 of the 100 points. And why this area was so important is because we know that not only are consumers making decisions based on their ratings and reviews that they're seeing, but ratings and reviews have actually become a very big ranking factor in local search as well. So it actually holds a lot of weight. So we looked at, are your average volume of reviews meeting the threshold for your industry? Same with the score. And then other factors like, are your reviews being responded to, and are they being responded to in a reasonable time frame? And then finally, engagement made up the rest of the points at 17.5. We know that engagement is becoming kind of that currency in digital marketing, and a lot of platforms are using that engagement to really understand what are valid business results for consumers, and they're looking at that real consumer engagement as that vote. So looking at how these consumers are engaging with businesses through Q&A and other areas of these profiles and pages was also very important. You can see that we can further break down each one of these ranking factors that went into the 3 buckets of presence, care, and engagement. And we're over 20 plus ranking factors that we looked at this year. If you notice the color coding here, the dark black ranking factors were factors that were taken into account into the score in 2019. The red factors are ones that were introduced new this year in 2020. So in 2020, we actually expanded the ranking factors, not because we wanted to just make the scoring more complex. It's because your local brand visibility and presence and the scoring and the ranking factors that go into that are actually getting a lot more complex across all of these digital properties. So we needed to make sure that the scoring and the benchmark reflected these new factors as well. Okay. So as we break down the results of the Localized Marketing Benchmark, we actually can break down benchmarks by specific industries. And again, this was really important when we started conducting this research, because we're finding that there's more sophistication toward localized marketing in some categories over others, right? And that sophistication actually varies pretty widely. So being able to break down what is the average benchmark for education, for instance, versus retail is really important to this type of research, and really to help a multi-location marketer understand what is it that they need to do to be competitive in the marketplace today. In terms of the data set, I know Michael spoke to this, but just to give you a sense of all of the data we were able to look at, again, with the help of Places Scout, we were actually able to look at over 200,000 individual locations, which we studied across all 3 of these major platforms, allowing us to look at millions of individual local reviews, review responses, and engagements across these 3 properties. So just to use Michael's words, a treasure trove of data we were able to look at, see trending, and all kinds of things. So just to give you some confidence on the base data we're looking at. Now, when we look at the results, I'm going to give you some of the highlights. So again, this is the 2nd year of our study, and what we found in 2020 is that the benchmark has improved. As you can see, in 2019, the average benchmark out of a 100-point score that a multi-location brand was achieving in localized marketing was 45 points, less than half of the points available. And then in 2020, although we're seeing some improvement, almost a 20% improvement here, we're still really at the midway point of the opportunity that is in localized marketing for multi-location business. So going back to that first slide that we talked about, which was localization, the biggest untapped opportunity for multi-location marketers, it really comes back to this research, right? So right now we know marketers are leaving 40 plus points on the table, and sometimes higher depending on the category. We also found over the course of our 2-year research that those brands that are doing a really effective job in localized marketing are actually growing their businesses faster as well. So LMBR leaders are actually sales leaders as well. So to break down this slide, I know there's a lot going on here. When you look on the left at these 3 bars, what you're seeing here is for 2020, our average LMBR score was 54 for a multi-location brand. When you look at the top category leaders, these would be the brands that are scoring the highest in each one of the industries that we studied. The average benchmark of those industry leaders, or category leaders, sorry, was 69. And then when you look at the top 10 businesses or brands that were scoring highest overall across all the multi-location businesses that we studied, they were scoring on average at 84 points out of 100. So you can see There's definitely some sophistication here, right? And then when you start to break down their average growth rate in terms of revenue by each of these three buckets, again, multi-location marketers on average, we see an average growth rate in revenue of 8%. You look at the top category leaders in each one of the categories that we studied, and we see that their growth rate is a little bit higher at 11%. And then those top 10 brands or businesses that are scoring highest in the score are actually growing significantly faster, 3 times faster than their peers. So again, just a really powerful correlation that we're finding to a very strong localized marketing presence to your actual business growth. And again, this is the second year in a row that we've seen this type of correlation. So we talked about the importance of breaking down the specific industries and the benchmarks by industries. This chart is just showcasing what that looks like from a trending standpoint. So as you can see in this chart, the lighter blue bars are the 2019 categories that were studied, and the green bars are the categories that were studied in 2020. So overall, across the board, in every category that we studied, we've seen some good improvement from 19 to 20, which is great. I think multi-location brands as a group are really recognizing how important having this localized digital presence is to their businesses. And we're seeing some good growth here. You're also recognizing, hopefully, that we have some new green bars that we've added. Again, like our ranking factors, we're continuing to add the number of categories that we're studying and breaking out in this research as well. So we have a lot more insight and data around each one of these industries, but for the sake of today's webinar, we're going to keep this pretty top level. But again, if you're interested in how each one of these categories break out, we'll provide some information at the end on how to download the full report and even request some of this information for yourself. But moving on, I want to talk about the top 10 brands. These are the brands that were scoring the highest across the overall benchmark and across the scoring in general. And as you can see here, every single one of these brands scored over 80 points in the overall benchmark, which means that they were really taking care of their localized presence across all three of the categories studied. A lot of attention to care or their local ratings and reviews and how they're responding to their customers. And then finally, engagement, that each one of these brands are taking care and a lot of time in engaging their local community and audiences that we saw in each one of their profile pages. So just looking at each one of these, we didn't have a top brand for each one of the industries studied, right? Because some of the industries actually weren't ranking high enough to be one of the top 10 brands. But overall, you can see that across the board, we have a lot of restaurants, a lot of personal care services that were making these top brands, which makes sense when you think about the fact that a lot of these businesses are, service related, and they see their customers frequently. So definitely a trend that we were seeing in the top 10 brands. Overall, across the brands that were studied and the categories that were studied, we did see some top factors that related back to this overall localized marketing performance and correlated to the top 10 leaders. So a couple of those things were care and engagement based scoring categories really being areas of emphasis for these top 10 brands. Although presence is really important, we were just seeing that a lot of these brands were getting to their reviews a lot quicker than some of the other brands. They had large volumes of reviews that they were basing their reputations on. And then again, going back to engagement, really engaging that local community, whether it was answering their questions or really engaging them through localized posting. We also saw scores were highest when brands were scoring well consistently across all three of the categories that were studied and the platforms that were studied. Again, going back to the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, which is kind of the last point here. Again, what we're seeing being very important to a lot of multi-location brands in your overall digital presence is really having some consistency around how you're optimizing that presence across all three of these really important sites. and not just, putting all of your eggs in one basket, whether that be Google My Business or Yelp or Facebook, but really giving proper attention to all three of those areas, knowing how well used those sites are and other areas that these sites are feeding. We also, outside of the industry results that we were able to see in this research, we were also able to see some pretty interesting things by platform when we actually break down the platform results. So we'll go through each one of these, and I'll kind of highlight some of the trends that we saw. So again, across all of the brands that we studied, for Google My Business, we were seeing a lot of multi-location brands really taking care of claiming their GMB pages and filling out their profiles, which is excellent. Again, this is a really, really big area where a lot of search is executing. If you look at just the total reviews and average rating, these seem to be high across other platforms that we looked at as well. Average rating on GMB for a multi-location business is now 4.15. That's important. I know just a year ago, we were citing research that the average consumer was looking for a 3.5 average rating. And obviously those stakes are getting higher. So 4.15 for Google. When you look at the reviews responded to, although 21% seems low when you just consider this one site, it's actually the highest review response rate across Yelp, Facebook, and GMB. So multi-location brands are definitely taking a lot more attention and care to the reviews that are happening on GMB than what we're seeing on the other platforms, and I'll show that to you in just a second. We also noticed that the average review response time, again, this might cause folks to kind of scratch their head. 40 days on average to respond to a review seems really high. It seems very lengthy. But to be honest, we are seeing this across the board for a lot of multi-location businesses. It takes certain businesses a considerable time to get back to these reviews, although it's important to understand that the average consumer expects that a review that's been posted, especially if it's a critical review, meaning they didn't have a good experience, their expectation is that the business will get back to them within 24 hours. So there's definitely some work here for multi-location businesses. But again, overall, as we start to look at the different platforms that we studied, you're going to notice that 40 days was actually a much quicker time than what we're seeing on Facebook as well as Yelp. And then you can see here at the bottom, what's really interesting is there's some new areas of the GMB page with question and answer, Q&A, as well as posting, which are incredible areas for businesses to leverage to keep in touch with their community, get that engagement. And again, these numbers were pulled prior to the pandemic and Google turning off features like Q&A. So it's just interesting to see just how low some of these areas are being utilized today. And then overall for the 3-pack, we talked about the 3-pack in the beginning, how important your visibility is in that 3-pack when a search is being conducted. So what we were finding was 1 out of 4 of the businesses that we were studying was getting some good location 3-pack visibility, which is pretty low considering how important that space is. Again, now looking at Facebook, you can see again, for multi-location businesses, great care is being taken to claiming your pages, filling out the profiles, which is great to see. However, a couple of things here, just I'll point out really quickly, reviews responded to, and average review response time. So again, only 15% of reviews on Facebook being responded to, and it's taking 3 times as long to get a response than what we saw for GMB for Facebook. So really interesting. Another interesting highlight is that Facebook, out of the 3 large platforms, tends to have the highest average rating at a 4.21. If you recall, the GMB average rating was 4.15. So again, just really interesting trend. I think Facebook in general makes it really easy to leave a recommendation, is what they're now calling their reviews. So that could definitely have some impact on this rating. And then we're as you would imagine, we're seeing really great posting to Facebook by multi-location businesses. This is where Facebook really started, and we're seeing a lot of brands take part here, which is great, but we would really love to see this extended into GMB posting as well. Okay. And then looking at Yelp, again, we're seeing some pretty good listings claimed and listings claimed on Yelp. We are not seeing good profile completeness on this area in particular. So lots of areas of opportunity here to update profiles across the multi-location businesses and industries that we studied. We've also seen that Yelp tends to have the lowest average rating and lowest number of reviews across the platforms, which makes sense. This is more of a very specialized ratings and reviews site. But again, given the areas that Yelp is feeding, from Apple Maps navigation to Siri, it's really important that multi-location brands take note of these areas and start to optimize as well. So outside of all of the platforms that we studied, I did want to highlight again these really underutilized areas that I see as huge areas of opportunities for multi-location brands. Again, Q&A is definitely an area of opportunity. Right now, Google has made the decision to turn that feature off during the pandemic to allow businesses to really focus on, communicating to their community, making sure their community understands, how they're servicing them in this time. So understand that Q&A will come back. It's just not active right now, but it's definitely a really important area to take note of. But posts on Google My Business pages are still available, are a very effective way to share updates with your local community, from offers to posting about new services, etc. And it's a great way to gain more visibility and traffic to your pages. So just to give you some background here, posts are completely free. All that they require is that you have a GMB profile and page set up. It gives you the ability to feature timely, actionable content, right? As I mentioned, whether it's an offer, a sale, new services, etc. And these posts receive prominence on mobile and map searches. So we see a lot of multi-location brands doing a really great job leveraging their local Facebook pages for posting. Again, just another key area to be aware of and be utilizing. Based on the research that we did, we see that about 23% of businesses are utilizing Google Posts. Again, very low percentage. And only 9% of locations have posted on Google within the last 30 days. So again, this might have changed a little bit since the pandemic, but just really kind of highlighting an area of opportunity. I'll go quick here on Q&A, but again, Q&A is actually not just question and answers. What we've seen historically is that consumers in your community, they're posting a broad range of topics in Q&A. It could be reputation related. It could have to do with, products in your local stores and outlets. But understand that it's not just simple question and answer sometimes. Oftentimes, what consumers are seeing in Q&A can make the deciding factor if the consumer is going to continue their search or going to contact you. And the more answered questions a consumer sees about your business, the more confidence that's going to give them in building, in visiting your business. So understand that this is a key area of opportunity for you. A great tactic is to proactively post frequently asked questions that you might get about your business in this area, so that they're waiting there for consumers when they go to a Q&A section like this. To give you some usage stats on what we saw in the research and why we think this is a key area of opportunity, on average, every single multi-location business that we studied, each one of their locations had about 2.5 questions posted on their profile pages, and 96% of these questions are unanswered. Of the answers that were posted, just 7% of the responses were coming from the business. The rest of those answers were coming from the community. So another important thing to understand about Q&A on Google is the community, if they see a Q&A posted, they are able to go in and answer that on behalf of your business. So just understand that these are, again, key areas that people are looking at to find out information about your business and are areas of opportunity for you to engage in. Again, Q&A is on pause right now during the pandemic, but when it comes back, definitely an area for multi-location brands to consider investing more time in. So this is how the scoring broke down by each of the categories that we studied. Again, the benchmark overall that we saw across all the industries was 54. Health and medical industry or category coming in right in the middle here. And you can see just on one chart kind of how these benchmark scores varied across each of the different industries that we studied. Again, we've got lots of detail around each one of these categories and the specific areas that these categories are doing well, and then the specific areas that are of opportunity to each of these categories. And no surprise, I guess, to us, these vary by category. So we saw, maybe in retail, those businesses were doing a good job of claiming their pages, but in terms of reviews, not doing such a good job in terms of responding, right? And those areas of opportunity kind of vary by each one of these industries. So again, if you're interested in learning more, I really urge you to download the report or request more information after this presentation. In terms of just some overall insights across the categories that we studied, I mentioned this before, but these personal care categories were really kind of rising to the top as being a lot more sophisticated in localized marketing techniques and other categories. Fitness, education, personal care as it relates to beauty, and massage and other services like that. When examining all of the performance across the companies, again, some of these success factors came down to a lot of these categories that were service related, having that high touch interaction. So really causing a lot of those businesses to really take care of and take part in those conversations and those profiles a lot quicker than some other categories. We also saw that companies in these categories that were ranking high performed well across all three of the different platforms that we studied in terms of claimed listings, profile completeness, in terms of active review management. Again, just really on top of not only responding to reviews, but actually building that base of reviews up so that it adds to their credibility. And then finally, they were also exceeding just optimizing their profiles and their presence across all three of the big channels that we've studied, as we mentioned several times in the webinar, just really having a comprehensive localized marketing approach across all three of these sites. So in summary, based on the research that we've done, consistency is king. Optimizing ranking factors across the three big localized marketing platforms really creates that whole is greater than the sum of its parts advantage. So really helps you maintain that really competitive presence, trust and authority with the local community. Responding to reviews with both being comprehensive in your response as well as the speed at which you respond is highly important to not only how your consumers view you as a business, but go into your rankings as well. And then, going down to some of those tactics that are really kind of key areas of opportunity for multi-location brands. Right now, Google Posts, very, very important for brands to start engaging there, especially now while, where timely information's really important. And then Q&A when that area opens up again. So overall, guys, I think it's just important to understand that although we're in a crisis situation right now and we're seeing consumers that are halting spending, that spend is going to return. And those businesses that can adapt and offer their consumers value in this time of uncertainty is really going to be those that win that loyalty and that spend when it returns. And this area of localized marketing is really the way to do that. So I really appreciate everybody's time and attention. I know we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. Before we get to that though, if you want to know more about the research and download the report, you can do that at lmbenchmark.com. On that landing page, you can also request your own score, where you can actually see how your business ranks against your industry, as well as the overall benchmark with some actionable content as well. So that's all we've prepared today. Michael, I don't know if you've gotten any questions as we've been going through the content.
Yes, and first, thank you, Monica. Very robust, a lot there. Thank you for all of that, and just really actionable, concrete, tactical stuff in there. So that's much appreciated. So yes, we have about 10 minutes, and we have kind of a mix of some audience questions here and my own questions, and I'll do my best to kind of thematically cluster things. But to start off, just to kind of synthesize some of those actionable takeaways that you went over, what do you see as kind of the biggest areas of improvement, I guess, or the biggest opportunities to improve? You mentioned a lot of great things like Q&A and posts on Google, even though those are currently deactivated. Review response time, I think, was one that jumped out for me. Consistency, as you just mentioned. And then also, I think one that needs to be underscored is pay more attention to Yelp, because it sounds like a lot of people are not doing that. So what would you add to that, kind of the short list of kind of quick takeaways for things people can start doing today?
Yeah, I think the consistency one's a big one, right? And I think we're seeing more and more that as these platforms are building their knowledge and understanding of businesses, that having your content and your reviews and your business properly represented across multiple platforms that are already getting good consumer engagement and traffic is highly important, right? I see a lot of brands kind of think that their GMB page or their Google My Business page is the end all be all. And although it's highly important, it's so important to understand that Google is taking in things like, again, I mentioned in the beginning, social conversations, the review content on each of these individual sites outside of their own GMB reviews, to build this authority and expertise around a business. And so that consistency and optimizing, again, your presence, getting to those reviews, getting your locations to post relevant and timely content is so essential across all of those different properties. And we can't stress that enough.
Yeah, that's a key point. I mean, authority on Google can be built outside of Google in terms of the information it's ingesting. So that's a key point. So a question on kind of verticals. I thought it was very interesting that if we look at the top 10, you showed the top 10, and restaurants were very well represented within the top 10. Yet the overall score, the category score for restaurants, was, I believe, a 55. So that suggests a wide variance within the category, and that's potentially an opportunity for restaurants to really start to differentiate and gain ground by doing some of the best practices you went over. Of course, lots of sit-down restaurants are kind of in turmoil now in terms of having to shut their doors for their typical type of sit-down business. But it seems like that's one of the categories where a lot of kind of benefit can be gained from these results.
Yeah, and I think that the current environment really emphasizes just how important this area of marketing is to a business like a restaurant. We've seen a lot of surge in traffic as soon as people had to stay at home and these restaurants had to kind of close their doors. Where were people going for information? They were going to these local profile pages, trying to figure out if they're open, are they doing delivery service? A lot of restaurants were actually holding out on doing using some of the functionality in these local pages to allow delivery services, things like that, and they're now kind of running to them because it really is where consumers are going to find those services. And I think Google has done a really good job of opening up different features on these pages, given the environment, to even put in the business name of, if you're a restaurant, you can put in the business name now that you do delivery. So again, there's so much opportunity here. Like you mentioned, Michael, there are certain brands that we see that have just, really taken advantage of this localized marketing opportunity and are growing their business hand over fist as a result of it. But certainly others in the category that just are late adopters.
And that's an opportunity to grow. Now, there's a question here that's asking about if we have information on self-storage as a category, and I'll expand on that question with the broader question of, when creating this study, how do you choose the verticals that are included? Are they the ones that are kind of most prevalent? And related to that, you mentioned lots of ways that the study itself evolves over time, because of course it's a moving target with things like ranking factors and criteria. What about the vertical inclusion? Is that something that we can expect might grow over time in terms of what we're looking at?
Yeah, that is actually a great question and something I didn't cover. So in terms of the verticals and the brands that were studied, that list was developed taking the Franchise Times top 200 brand list, so the top 200 largest franchise brands, and then we supplemented that list with entrepreneurs' fastest growing brands as well, multi-location brands. So overall, I think with the overlap, we studied a little bit over 280 plus brands in the overall study. And considering that group of businesses, when we broke out the individual industries that we studied, it was based on where we had a good enough base of businesses that we studied within those industries. So we have other industries that we did study as part of this research, but we probably didn't put it in here because we didn't have a big enough base of companies within that industry to give it its own benchmark. That doesn't mean we can't give individual businesses what their benchmark is, right? If there's a self-storage business, you just want to know where you're ranking. How are you doing in terms of, really taking advantage of, this localized market. Requesting your own localized marketing benchmark score will give you that. And then as we build more of this knowledge around companies in these specific verticals, we will continue to expand those industries, like you saw with this year. I think we added 4 or 5 new categories this year.
That makes sense. And there's actually a question here that relates to what you just said, so I'll throw it in here, which is, you went over the correlation between the LMBR scores and actual revenue performance in the real world. So actually the LMBR results and high results are correlating to these companies also scoring well kind of in real life in kind of revenue terms. Where do those, the question is essentially where does those revenues figures come from?
Yeah, so we as a research group have been leveraging the Franchise Times revenue growth rate information as a constant source. So again, it's one source. They track business revenue over time and have a methodology for collecting that, which I'm happy to share post this webinar. But we did rely on one source for that. So that we could be confident that we were using one type of methodology when we were looking at the trending. But that is the source of the revenue data.
That's great. And there's another question here on methodology. So while we're on that topic, how did you come up with the scoring system or the scoring model? Because you mentioned there were 20 plus criteria that add up to 100 points, and they're clustered into presence, care, and engagement. Those scores themselves and how they're weighted, I believe you kind of came up with that based on and informed by kind of consensus among SEO experts on things like ranking factors. But talk a little bit about how you did that and how that likewise is a moving target.
Yeah, and this is where our partnership with Localogy became pretty essential here. And coming up with the ranking factors and the weighting. I know Localogy's analysts spent a lot of time interviewing SEO experts on what they're seeing in the space, as well as seeing how things have, kind of changed from the 2019 report to 2020. So knowing what ranking factors that that are pretty core that we used in 2019, and then again going back to local SEO experts, finding out where we're really seeing powerful correlation and causation to businesses being ranked over others. That's where we brought in new ranking factors and gave different categories certain weights. So lots of conversations went into that. It's not perfect by any means. And why it's not perfect is because as people who are doing local SEO or who have been optimizing their local business presence for some time understands that these ranking factors are changing all the time. So the LMBR score represents a moment in time where we think, these ranking factors, the weighting, really relates back to how these platforms are using that data to, give these individual businesses either ranking authority or presence. But again, we do see that change over time, which is why we've decided to do this research every year so that we can take those changes into account.
Now, speaking of, forward-looking next steps, that was all just very robust, everything you just presented. And you mentioned it, it really only scratches the surface given the extensiveness of the data on which the report is based. So that's all to say that this, the original data set, the base data set, seems like it's going to be the gift that keeps on giving, right? I mean, we have this report, and I encourage everyone to download it. But the question to you, Monica, is what's also the plan to kind of continue to draw out insights from that base data set, throughout the year until kind of next year's report?
Yeah, so what's interesting about all of the data we collected is that we have a tremendous amount of data on the individual categories, and we just didn't have enough time to really go into the specifics by each individual category in the overall LMBR 2020 report. So we give the high level, we talk about, what the scores look like, all of that great stuff. So going into 2020, we hope to do several additional vertical reports that really dive into each industry and talk about the areas of opportunity specifically for, say, restaurants over fitness over education, et cetera. So that's definitely something to look forward to. In the interim, though, as I mentioned, you can request your own score if you're really interested in finding out, what you might be ranking and why you're ranking that way. You can request that immediately, and I would, really encourage businesses to do that. It's really going to give you that, that actionable plan on those areas that you should be taking advantage of now, whether you're an essential business or non-essential business, to prepare yourself for this new environment, right? We know that we've seen this new surge of consumers going to local pages like GMB and going back to places like Facebook. So again, consider this your action plan. So I would encourage folks to definitely request your own personalized score and figure out those areas you can be working on now.
Yeah, that's great. And we have a lot of questions here that are related to getting the report, the replay of this webinar itself. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Lizzie to close us out here with some of those things. But before I do that, I want to thank you, Monica, for your time and insights today.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that dialed in.
Great. So Lizzie, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much again to Monica and Mike. Great questions and discussion. And also I want to thank SOCi so much for putting this together. Just a few more items from Localogy before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, localogy.com. Just navigate to research and resources and you'll find webinars under that. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please be sure to visit localogy.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.